as, someone trying to be a holistic healthcare provider in my role as an athletic trainer, it was really important for me to be able to develop my own skill set and make sure that I was prepared to manage, the 700 different athletes that I'm working with, and their own expectations and their own journeys. Particularly, like when you think about athletic training, a lot of people don't realize we're doing a lot of rehab. If someone's injured, that's a big hit to their identity and whatnot. And so giving myself the ability to help them through and navigate that within my scope of practice was really important to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I went back.
Well, I appreciate vulnerability because I think for a lot of us, just in a career, profession, even as a student athlete, I think we get stuck in these avenues of just we're on the great trajectory and we don't take time to reflect and see where further growth can happen. So kudos to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I as well am Dr. Craig Hanthorn. I've been a doctor for, I think going on 4 years now. A little over 4 years. My background's a little different. So I obtained my master's in school psychology. So for years, for 10 years to be exact, I've worked as a school psychologist and then recently transitioned out of that realm. And that's what led me into private practice. During that time, though, is when I went back to school to obtain my doctorate in sports psychology. I think for me at the time, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself as a school psychologist. I could have went back and got my PhD in school psychology, but instead I wanted to broaden horizons, see what else I could do. And I think at that point I had just moved to Connecticut, and I was so intrigued by the world of sports. I've always played sports growing up. I've been around sports. My father was a coach. I was active playing basketball, volleyball, baseball, any sport I could kind of get my hands on growing up. That was kind of what I did. And at that point, I was working, when I made the decision to go back to school, I was working at a separate facility for kids with extreme mental health. And it was eye-opening to see how many students were not being able to access athletics because of mental health, but had the passion, the drive, and the capabilities to be athletes. And I think that was one of the things that kind of spearheaded me researching further fields of psychology and seeing the impact. So I went back. Shortly after, I relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio, and I started coaching. I was coaching at Coleraine High School and then Western Hills High School in Cincinnati. And kind of like where you're coming from, I was noticing it was beneficial for me to already be in the program, right? So here I am sitting as a coach in high trauma environments, but in the process of developing further skill sets that apply in the settings. And I think that was one of the most beneficial things for me to be able to develop rapport, address needs, even to a degree of like coaching. I remember being so ingrained in like how I was coaching to meet the needs of so many people. And I think that's a benefit of being a school psychologist as well as a sports psychologist, trying to understand what is the right way to watch film. How do I ask the questions? How do I educate them? How do I get them to understand not just the successes, but areas of growth that we need, and also allow the areas of growth not be impeding mentally, but see it as a challenge or see it as motivation rather than something else negative about myself or about the team. After coaching for years and working as a school psychologist, I transitioned into being an administrator in schools. And so that's when I decided to expand and open the practice of performance psychology, where we offer mental health services to a wide range of athletes, ages 12 to I think my oldest athletes around 22, 23, in all aspects, all walks of athletics. I have a junior high athlete. I have an athlete who just selects to play club. I have athletes in Division I. I have athletes, pushing for professional status. And I think one of the things that you highlighted that was just so important is, again, kind of going back to what we started with, sport for so long has just been a physical piece. Can I get the skills? Do I have the weight? Do I have the speed, the accuracy? And for so long, we've pushed off to the side the mental aspect of just what can mental skills doing for me? What can proactive thinking, mindset, affirmations, communication with coach, communication with team, communication to myself. We've I wouldn't say neglect, but we haven't highlighted it. And I think this one of the most profound things this generation has challenged us to do is to think holistically in that approach. And so for me, it's about giving the tools that may not necessarily always increase performance, but it's going to increase how you internalize your performance and internalize what I can do next, how to reflect healthily, how to take coaches' feedback, all those aspects. Talk a little bit about your experience with athletics. You touched on it a little bit, but your experience with athletes and mental health, especially in the world of training.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I was working at the number one school in the state, number one high school in the state for academics. And so, as you can imagine, lots of pressure on the academic side to perform well. And then lots of athletes. I think we had 1,500 athletes between junior high and high school that we're like working with. Big school, right? And so amongst my, staff of 3 athletic trainers, we had to manage a lot of different levels of play, levels of experience, and levels of intensity or like competitiveness, right? Now everyone's competitive. I'm not saying that some people were or weren't, but there are varying, degrees to each of those. And so as an athletic trainer, working with athletes at that level, and some of whom are trying really hard to play in college and get scholarships, get full rides in their chosen sport, and not always being part of a team that's winning state every year. Like that wasn't really what we were known for in most of our sports. But you can still be successful even if your team as a whole is not. You as an individual can be successful within the team setting as well. And so, I'm navigating all of this with multiple athletes simultaneously. And I felt just really underprepared for it. And as time went on, as my career there, kept moving forward and my experiences kept, happening, I guess, that's whenever I really started to feel comfortable and recognizing the importance of, like you say, mental skills, right? It's not just, can you make the 3-pointer every time you shoot it? Right. It's not how accurately does the quarterback throw the ball. It's also, how are they receiving information? Are they talking down on themselves a lot? How are they dealing with setbacks in rehab? So one thing I talk about as a healthcare provider is like healing is not linear. And that's true for physical healing, like in a physical injury, but also mental healing and the way in which we're experiencing the world around us. And so I had to oftentimes prepare my athletes for, hey, you're not going to be better every single day. Right. You're going to be better over time, but there's going to be dips along the way. And those individual days and how we handle those dips really makes a difference. And so I became a better healthcare provider because I understood more and more as time went on, both through my education and through experience, that if we're preparing someone for the challenges that they're going to face, one way or another, it's going to happen. The better prepared they are, the better they can manage it when the time comes. Right. And I started to see that over and over again. And it's something I really preach to my students now. I'm preparing the next generation of athletic trainers to go out into the world, and I want them to be holistic providers in the same way. And so I want to talk about it. Like, I want it to be something they experience because they're probably not going to get a master's in sports psychology. And so for me in our master's program, if I can integrate that into our discussions about rehab and treatments and in the classes within the framework that we already have, they're going to be even more prepared to manage the same situations I was facing.
Right. And I think you're hitting on exactly like what is our goals for Hustling for Headspace. Yeah. And I think that's exactly it, is this idea that if I'm an athlete, and I was an athlete, you can't tell now.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, yeah. Every day, probably 6 out of the 7 days a week, I was doing something related to my sport, whether it's in season or out of season. 6 out of the 7 days, I would probably take a day off, probably Sunday, be with the family or just be present, work on homework, whatever time period I was in. But 6 out of those 7 days, something, whether it was cardio, weightlifting, skill building, right? 7 out of the 7 days, I'd practice some sort of eating. 7 out of the 7 days, I'd practice some sort of sleeping. 0 out of 7 days was I ever working towards a mental space of developing skills. And I think that's the purpose of this podcast. And it's the purpose of performance psychology. It's the purpose of our work. It is to give individuals the tools and the skill sets to enhance their performance and how they feel about themselves and how they internalize themselves and how they communicate with themselves and others. I think there's a wide spectrum. I think when you hit on the note of saying, like, it's not necessarily, when I'm in recovery, it's not just a physical recovery. There's a mental aspect to it There's a confidence aspect. There is an ability to, if I'm in a team sport, put myself back into competition. There's just so many layers, even to that small aspect. One of the things I challenge all my athletes on is just that. Like, how many days a week do you practice certain things of your sport? How many days a week do you practice nutrition? Whether it's healthy or not, how many days do you do it? How many days are, and all my athletes then in the beginning, how often are you doing something mental and really focusing in and being mindful to it? And most athletes we're not spending that time. And I think that to me is the driving force of, if we want to be prepared for performance, you have to put in the work, just as if you're going to practice. I don't ask my athletes to put 2 hours in daily working on mental skills, but I do ask them during the course of a week, you have to be mindful of it. If you want to be able to step up to the free throw line, knock it down, trust your routine, and not fall victim to your mindset and negativity or the time or the clock or the crowd, you have to be able to put together and practice some of the mental skills. I don't know if you want to build off the goals of the podcast.
I do, actually, because one thing I want to point out, and we mentioned this earlier, but not just for athletes themselves, but for all of the stakeholders in there, right? Parents can gain something from this. We want coaches to be able to gain something from this.
Yeah.
We want to give these other individuals the tools and the knowledge and even the language to understand how to make their athletes' lives better, whether that's your child or just your player on your team, one of your patients if you're an athletic trainer or PT or even a team doc. We want these people to be able to enter into their athletic spaces and bring these same skills and knowledge and this approach to having a healthier performance, a healthier athletic performance in general. And so it's not just for athletes, although we'll talk a lot about athletes and to athletes, but it's intended to also help others as well.
In my practice, I have a lot of parents approach me.
Yes.
Not because they want to know what I'm talking about in therapy, but what can I do? I'm picking up my kiddo, or we're going out to dinner after performance, and they are just riding themselves hard. What skills are we working on in therapy that then they get to tie back in? One of the things I also highlight to everybody, and I want to highlight this as also a goal, is this is not therapy. This is not, and most of sports psychology is not therapy. Most of sports psychology is teaching and learning. A lot of my athletes who hesitate coming in because of therapy. Why do you take geometry? Why are you enrolled in calculus? Is it because you know it already and you just got to perfect the craft, or are you learning it? Oh, I'm learning it. Exactly. Think of sports psychology as the same avenue. Most of us have the skill sets to perform the mental skills. You got to learn them first. You got to learn why they're there. Be intentional about their use. Be purposeful. Acknowledge what you're experiencing, and then use some of your tools. It's the same thing as a basketball athlete who's inbounding the ball, and all of a sudden you're facing a 2-2-1 press. You're not just going to dribble wildly. You're going to read what the defense is giving you. You're going to understand, use your previous learned knowledge to execute a press break.
Yeah.
I think to also go into it, I think first we probably should educate the listeners or the viewers on what is sports psychology, right? Yeah. And so for me, it's just an avenue for individuals to access therapy, learning skills, coping skills. I think in my experience, as you know, but the listeners don't, I've adopted 3 kids, one of which is a 7-year-old. Thank you, Dr. Nat, for watching him on several occasions. But I have a 21-year-old who's in the Army and a 22-year-old who is working, graduated with his associates and all that stuff. But when coaching them, so they were previous athletes that then I took and went through the process of adoption, one of the things that just became so prevalent is how mentally impacting their external pieces were. Coaching in some of the schools I've coached in, understanding that when I entered in the gym, it wasn't just about basketball. There was so many more layers that I was having to deal with. And I think part of sports psychology is getting athletes to understand there are ways for you to not necessarily compartmentalize, but deal and work through sport. There's also ways to be going through what you're going through in life, just as everybody at Walnut, just as everybody at West High. You're all dealing with some sort of layers that impacts performance, and there are ways to not just work through that, but also overcome them, you know? And I think for athletes, it's about learning some of the tricks of the trade of, yeah, you can't go to sleep during a game when you're anxious, you know? So what are some skills to learn to not just acknowledge your anxiety, but maybe put in the work beforehand so we don't get as anxious? Not to say sports psychology is going to heal your anxiety. It is giving you the tools to be able to manage your anxiety or your depression or your sadness, your grief, your anger. You know, I think back to, I wish I would have had sports psychology.
Yeah.
So I hated being a ball handler in basketball. They would be like, hey, Craig, go play the one
It's
point
so
guard.
much pressure.
Hate it.
It's so much pressure.
Hate it.
I
What are you
hated
guys
it too.
doing to me? This is stupid.
Right.
I'm not a ball handler. And one, I wish I would have listened to my coaches more, because that was something they always highlighted. Like, hey, your ball handling skills aren't great. Okay, cool. But I think the other thing that people were afraid to say is you look timid when you're the ball handler.
Yeah.
And it would have been an eye-opener to be like, hey, what's timid mean? What characteristics are you seeing out of me that are demonstrating my lack of confidence? Because boy, was I not confident in ball handling. But I think now, sitting here 20 plus years later, it is that idea that you were so anxious on making a mistake. You were so anxious, you were overthinking everything, that then like performance was impacted because you felt like if I did X, my consequence would be Y, you know, and instead of understanding that sport is consequences and failures are going to happen, you know, and understanding that and having confidence. But I think I was so anxious about some of those things. And then you'd get in the game and you would want to be perfect, you know, and that mindset of perfectionism is not reality.
Right.
It would be nice to have a perfect game. It would be nice to perform perfectly. That's not reality.
Yeah,
That's not going to happen. And I think so many of my athletes that I work with now have that mindset, that mistakes snowball rather than mistake happens, acknowledge the mistake. What is the growth that you're going to have from this mistake, and move on, whether that's in performance or after game or after performance. I think when I look at who can benefit from sports psychology, obviously athletes, number one subgroup.
Yeah.
But I think as you were highlighting, I think coaches, one of the things that sticks out of my head is when I completed my practice, I had a very talented group of athletes, and I was a very talented team. Little shop talk. We were running a 2-2-1 press that we then condensed into half court. But in order to do that, we were trapping everything. And one of the things that I was running into was with that, you had to communicate. But when you are in a chaotic state of a 2-2-1, trapping everywhere, it's hard to communicate. And I think my athletes were struggling at understanding how rotation works. Without going into too much detail, one of the things that came is we would watch film. We would break it down in practice. We would talk about it. One of the things I was missing was just the kinesthetic motion of it. But we could walk through it all we want. But one thing that I found so beneficial was I put all the players on a rope. I found this long rope in our gym, thank God for ropes, and each player had to hold on to it like we were in kindergarten class. But
Like
one
follow
thing
the leader.
yeah, just hold on to your space.
Yeah.
But as we moved the ball, it taught my kids what this rotation looks like. And so all of a sudden now I'm passing the ball and someone's pulling the rope because they need to go trap, which then pulls the other person into their space, which then rotates. And all of a sudden, my kids were understanding it kinesthetically. That's something I would have never thought of. We would have just kept repetitively working on it to try to get it through. But all of a sudden...
And getting yelled at by
Yeah,
coach.
yeah, because I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Ask any of my former athletes. I'm the crazy coach. But I think what happened is all of a sudden this epiphany occurred of like, if you can approach this with a modality of trying to meet the athletes rather than athletes meeting me. You know, my coaching style has worked for years and I've had very successful teams. But how much more success could I have had if I understood my athletes' mental states and learning styles and preferences and adapted coaching to them?
Yeah.
You know, and all of a sudden that team excelled. Once we started working on that activity more and more and building it in, and you know, you have to throw in scenarios and stuff. But once I figured out how to coach, not to say I didn't figure it out. Let me let me pull that word back. Once I started introducing more strategies to try to meet all my learners and all my players, there was that expectation that we did see an increase in performance. We saw an increase in traps. We saw an increase in turnovers, and we saw an increase in our point scoring because then we would transition out. You know, I say all that to say coaches can really benefit from understanding some of these tools and incorporating some of these tools. As a coach, I incorporated many mindful activities, many visual activities, not as many as I probably should have. But I think, you know, we get timid, we get scared. Coaches, we only got 2 hours. I only get 2 hours after school, maybe. That's even a good
Yeah,
practice.
if even, yeah.
And so how do I squeeze all this in and make this a priority? Well, there is that cross curricular. There's that idea that I can make both options work. Parents. One of the things that I've been blown away is parents aren't necessarily pushing their kids all the time. It's more or less they want to be able to help and assist. They don't know how. And I think obviously going back to the goals of this podcast, but benefiting as parents going through. I started this practice, I think 3 years ago. I've been blown away by how many parent and family sessions I've had, and not with the athlete. The athlete's like, yeah, I can join or not, but in my head, I'm like, no, this isn't about you. This is about me coaching your parents to do this. I think trainers, I mean, your time at Walnut was one of the best times that we got to co-collaborate and perform a wraparound support. Athletic directors, I think they are so busy with paperwork and day-to-day things, but I think they are, in all honesty, the gatekeeper of all. Like coaches are so immersed in the plan of practice. Parents are so immersed in the care of the kid and taking care of the basic needs. I think as trainers, you're focused on helping athletic trainers. I think you're focused on recovery. I think the ADs see it all.
Yeah.
They're getting check-ins from everybody, and I think having an athletic director who's mindful of these tools and mindful of what anxiety and performance anxiety and depression and communication and lack thereof, and be able to refer and help bridge some of these pieces. Not to say barriers don't exist. You saw barriers every day.
Oh yeah, they do for everyone.
Yeah.
But it's so helpful to have the support of an AD who understands that, caring for the whole athlete is the end goal, and who not just financially supports that, but finds other tangible ways of supporting that too. Talking to the coaches, encouraging coaches when they hire them on, or hiring coaches who are also very mindful of it. All of that is part of the AD's job. And I think that that's so vital. It really does make a difference to have an AD who cares. And because I've worked with ADs who care and ADs who don't care, and it is very stark. The types of support, at least from the sports medicine side, the types of support that we get and don't get, for those athletes.
Right.
So,
yeah, some of my mentors, they were previously at Ohio State. One, Dr. Day, has gone on to work with the Memphis Grizzlies, and it is just astounding to hear some of the things she's working on at the professional level mimic some of the things I'm working on at the high school level.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things where over time, is the trend going to be more athletes accessing the supports or learning the supports or learning skills or learning the tools? Do we see that progression trickle into the professional world? The NBA and the NFL a few years ago required each organization to have a sports psychologist on staff. Yeah, so every team in the NBA has a sports psychologist. The NFL is a little different. I don't think they're directly tied to the team, but they have to have somebody within the region who provides that service and those supports. So it's one of those fields that I think people aren't just signing up because it's the cool trend. It's because there is a direct need. As I try to communicate to all my families and athletes who are interested in those services, if professional athletes feel the need to go through it, don't we believe then that maybe that would be a beneficial thing for us to go through? As we kind of wrap things up, like where have you seen, and not necessarily even work tied to performance psychology myself, but just where have you seen mental health supports benefit the athlete?
Oh my God, in everything. I mean, obviously, my most recent experience is working with you, and seeing the way that you've been able to support, or were able to support the athletes I was working with at the time. I've moved past that job now, but my other big one was whenever I was an athletic training student, in 2013, 2014-ish.
We don't need years.
It's fine.
It's fine.
But
We're fine,
even,
I'm fine.
because this is kind of an emerging, field in a way. It's newer compared to some of our other, medical fields or healthcare fields. And even then, as an athletic training student, I was taking Xavier student athletes to sports psych appointments and seeing the difference in these athletes who were struggling to perform, who literally, got the yips, as we call it, and seeing these people get better because they were working on those skills. They weren't just spending time, developing their ball handling skills and taking the time to get in a cold tub after practice and caring for their body and caring for the physical side of sport, but they were also caring for the mental side, and the improvements speak for themselves.
Right.
And I think that's really important because it's really not something that I had. Like I was an athlete throughout all of high school and grade school, middle school, whatever. And this was never something that was even on my radar at the
Never.
time. And so,
Never.
and I think back and I'm like, man, how much better would I have been as an athlete if I had not just the language to even understand what I needed, but then the tools to do something about it. And myself, my siblings, my teammates, all of us could have been in such a better spot athletically had we known. So it's really nice to see that like we're moving in the right direction, or what I believe to be the right direction. But I have seen sports psychology make a huge difference in multiple athletes' lives, not just at the high school level, but at the D1 college level too.
Yeah.
And I think that it is just so vital that we keep talking about it. We talk openly about it. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what sports psychology is.
Yeah.
And I think that the more we talk about it, the more normal it becomes, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, our girl Simone. Hey, Simone girl.
Simone.
What do you mean we have a professional athlete?
The best in the world.
Who then has to step away from the highlight event of every 4 years.
Yeah.
Because there is a missing piece there. Craig, back in the good...
Hold on, let's back up. Simone Biles in 2016 Olympics, I think, the Tokyo
Rio.
Olympics.
No, that's Rio.
Oh, Rio. Okay.
Yeah.
But in Rio, she
Excelled.
did really well. And then
2021,
which was
has to step
2020.
away.
Yeah, she got the twisties.
Yeah.
So it's the yips, but for gymnastics, where she couldn't orient herself in space and time because of her performance anxiety and a host of other things. And that created a problem for her. And she said, yeah, I can't compete safely and at my best. And so I'm not going to compete at all. And someone else can take that spot.
Yeah.
So that's what we're referring to, just because.
Yeah. But I even think, so you even brought up an important point. I sucked at ball handling. I could have become the most repetitive, downright drill sergeant when it comes to ball handling skills. I could have practiced day in and day out. At the end of the day, yeah, sure, physically, motorly, I probably would have. Is motorly a word? I don't know. I don't think so.
Neuromuscularly.
Sure, I would have improved. I would have made advancements in that skill. That still does not help with the internalized anxiety I was experiencing. Yeah, it might have helped with confidence, but confidence and anxiety, guess what? They're two different things. I can be the most confident person in an anxious situation. It still is two separate feelings. And I think that's the gap. People have for years have thought, oh, just practice more. One of my highlights is most recently had the opportunity to work with a student athlete, Division II high school here, very competitive football program, a sophomore, just trying to make varsity offensive line, all the talents in the world, but anxiously was not performing to skill set. Working with him, being able to teach him the skills. The coaches just kept saying, you got to keep practicing, repetition. But guess what? All the repetition in the world still wasn't healing or addressing or giving the skills to the internalized emotions that we were feeling. But guess what kind of repetition does work? Grounding, breathing, reshaping, affirmation, reflecting. Being able to teach him some of those skill sets that then when you're playing, as he did this year for his team in the state championship, you're able to then pull on some of those skills and really work through performance anxiety at that point on the biggest stage of our state, And so that was one of the greatest accomplishments I feel like we've seen, or I've seen in the profession, is just seeing that growth and maturity where in July, fears of quitting, December, competing for a state championship, So kind of wrapping it up today.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously more to come.
Oh, yeah.
But just for today, what do you think is one of your biggest takeaways that maybe the audience can even reflect on?
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is this importance of prioritizing mental skills, not just physical skills. We are so familiar and it's so normalized to work on the physical skills, the ball handling, getting shots up in the gym all the time, or, running that route for the 100th time, practicing, penalty kicks in soccer, like whatever your sport is, the repetition part and the physical skills and getting your body prepared is important. However, I think my biggest takeaway is, hey, we need those mental skills as well to bridge this gap. Like physical skills are only going to get you so high. You can't get 100% of the way there and where you want to be, professionally or even just competitively as an athlete if you're not also building those mental skills.
Right.
So I think that's my biggest one is saying, okay, now I know that mental skills exist. And now we can spend, the next couple episodes figuring out, hey, what are those skills? What do they look like? How do I practice them?
Yeah.
I think that's my big takeaway. What about you?
I think two.
Ooh,
I
okay.
know. I think one is just the importance of reflection and
Yeah.
being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Where can I grow next? I think your story highlighted that the most to me today of just like you were an athletic trainer. You had your profession set and you decided to enhance it further. That takes reflection and that takes a really honest reflection of yourself to be able to get there. And I think we've all had to do that at some point in our life, but I think challenging the audience to reflect like in what areas could I grow in, whether it be helping my student athlete or as a student athlete, what areas am I struggling in? There is no such thing as the perfect athlete. Again, we have the NBA players who are professionals in the sport making millions of dollars who still access mental health and sports psychology services to enhance their performance and to deal with the day to day. I think the other thing is just that how important all the stakeholders are, how much we can probably reach coaches and we would love to get feedback from coaches and have some of them on eventually and athletic trainers and athletic directors and parents just to talk about their experience and talk about the importance of how this can be beneficial. And I think sports psychology is focused on just the athlete, but I think now being in the thick of the practice, it is so much more than just focusing on the athlete. So I think that's kind of where we're at.
Absolutely.
As we're going to wrap up today, we are so excited to be able to take you all on this journey. And I think one of the things that we will acknowledge many times is we're not the experts in the field, but we continue to evolve our levels of experience and evolve our skill set. I think it's something that you have to be mindful of is if you are stagnant, there's not much growth that can occur. So I think us being challenged, I think wanting to be more interactive with you as the viewers, I look forward to the opportunity to begin and to continue getting some skills.
Absolutely. And I think that this is going to be a good experience for all of us, right? Like, it's not just about making things better for you all as, the viewers, the athletes, the stakeholders and athletes, but also making us better and challenging us to find a way to communicate all of this and bring our own skill sets together, reflect on our own journeys and what we can learn from it, as well as learn from others in the future.
I think, so let's start at the basics. How about in our next episode, we work on mindset. We just introduced mindset to the viewers.
Love that.
And that's kind of where I always start the practice. But I think we have to be aware of our mindset. We understand of the fix versus growth, understand how the implications. It may take us a while, but I think it's worth us teaching and learning how to identify my mindset.
Great. Join us for episode 2 where we will discuss mindset.
Don't forget to follow us on our social media, Performance Psychology LLC on Facebook and Instagram for more tools. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Craig.
I'm Nat.
We'll see you all next time.
Okay. How long was that? I have no idea. I lost track of all time.
Y'all are at 30.